Tomorrow morning, perhaps early, walk alone. Quieten your mind and make your way to a perfectly natural environment and start listening. It's never really quiet. The birds sound different, livelier. The sun starts the whole growth process earlier. There are new smells, earthy scents, sometimes something crackling there. The breeze is pregnant with luminous seeds. In all of this exuberance, something is happening. A lot is happening. This awakening season, there's a special message just for you. Yet despite the colorful garb and the many voices and expressions of the springtime, and all those explosive Aprils before, somehow that personal message remains hidden, even from you for whom it was meant. Perhaps in order to hear it and finish this mystery, you need to allow your spirit the same excitement in growth that all things in springtime make so apparent. What persuades us then to fear, to remain timid as though under a rock? Why not exuberance? Do magnolias bloom enthusiastically? Or is that dramatic word enthusiasm exclusive to man? Does the yew tree grow courageously as it lunges toward the light, or is courage again a signal of only man's domain? Does the lead goose persevere in its migrations, or is perseverance pertinent only to the success of man's ascension, pertinent to the reclamation of heaven? Is the bear slothful at wintertime, or is laziness a trait peculiar to humankind? In the singing of the cedar waxwings, are you really hearing freedom? Or is the jackal really laughing? Or is it man alone who may taste the nectar of bliss through self-motivated freedom? And is it not man alone who knows explosive, reckless laughter? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm your host, Harry Langen, and tonight, for the next little while, I invite you to explore with me these questions, perhaps to find for yourself a special secret, yours alone, about your very humanity. We will meet some interesting people as we examine what it means to live at the top of our form, at the apex of our abilities, that our lives may rival for drama even the explosiveness of this exhilarating and mysterious season. Sometimes I look about at the thrilling land and skyscapes hereabouts, and I marvel, oh, the wonder of it all, and me so slight, as though a magnificently detailed dance hall was immaculately set out, and there time froze at 5:30 on a Friday afternoon, and there the vacant and grandly elegant room remains. Empty, yes, but expectant. I invite you to move time forward and enter alongside me, hear the music at last to dance, knowing then the continuity of being evident about us, especially in springtime. And in this continuity, man alone may know the richness of pleasure, the intelligence of it. The people we will meet en route on this program are people who may function like signposts, as it were, this way to the dance hall. They are people who are living at the top of their form, or claiming to be living at the top, or people advising us about what it really means to live vigorously, impeccably, joyously, correctly, and with elan. We will examine many philosophies and disciplines which people advocate, and by witnessing these people, you may enjoy an unusual edification, something to help you in your own pilgrimage. A few weeks ago on a program in this time slot, I should say, which was entitled Nelson Nightline, I had the pleasure of interviewing 3 women, professionals in the healing industry. Dr. Liz Barber, one of the 3, remarked that all great disciplines meet at the top. She has since explained that she was paraphrasing Dr. Carl Jung, the radical freethinker and tremendously brave psychologist who challenged almost all of the accepted theories related to the human psyche. So in deference to both Dr. Liz Barber and the late but always welcome Dr. Carl Jung, the title of this program is Meeting at the Top. No, I don't presume to be there yet. Or maybe I am and don't know it. Nonetheless, let's you and I climb alongside going upward, that we might at least share a glimpse of something really new. Perhaps that you may find this an acceptable, intimate occasion. We will find, perhaps together, the color of the spiritual landscapes. We will rap at the door of that great dance hall and learn again how to jitterbug with butterflies. Why not? Rather that than swallow again sluggish contempt. Another word uniquely human, contempt. And when the music's over and it's time to part company, the sister moon, never alone in the mighty firmament, will bathe us both in her precious radiances as they each skip across the ripples of the mournful Kootenay. O life divine, oh indeed, divinity, about that word we'll have to see. Oh, and about that secret. Contemplate, if you will, the word exquisiteness, and then introduce an adjective, human exquisiteness. And now one more word, but this time you must say aloud this word, this phrase, before you may abide comfortably at the top. Aloud now. My human exquisiteness. It's okay to say it aloud. Do you still see a little curve? Do you see a little curve now in the horizon there? Something pleasant, hopeful, new, something revolutionizing, as in lead to gold. Welcome back. In our den, thanks to Kootenay Exchange there on Baker Street, our wonderful den, we have a special guest to open our debut program. It is Professor John Rowell, teaching at Selkirk College, English and philosophy. Thank you. Welcome to the program, John.
Thank you.
Well, we have to define some parameters. We have to figure out, what does living at the top mean? Have there been any philosophers about whom you are familiar who have talked about living at the top and perhaps described what it really means?
Excuse me, yes, Aristotle comes to mind, making the clearest statement about living at the top. Actually, he had two notions of human excellence. One was what he called heroic excellence. The Greek word is makarios. And that's really like living like God. He asked the question, well, what would God do all day? And,
really?
Aristotle's answer, well, God would contemplate the universe. So that's what heroic excellence means. It means contemplating the universe. That's your task in life. So being a philosopher, living the contemplative life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the hierarchy, the second one is called eudaimonia, which we usually translate as happiness.
How do you say that again?
Eudaimonia.
Ah.
And that is for the ordinary citizen, not the non-philosopher. Basically what that involves is that you develop virtues. You may have heard of the idea of the golden mean, a midpoint between two extremes. That is cultivated by, first of all, trying to find a role model, trying to find somebody who has already achieved the mean. And then you just do what that person does, whoever that person may be. And what you'll find is that you will hit a midpoint between, as I said, between two extremes, and that's called the virtue. I mean, shall I give you an example?
Indeed.
Okay, an example would be courage. Okay, and courage would be a mean between recklessness as an extreme and cowardice as a deficiency or a lack.
May I interject just for a moment?
You may indeed, yeah.
Moderateness is implied here then, as Gautama Buddha might have said, live moderately?
No, actually it's some people get confused by this notion that the idea is that the mean itself is an extreme, as it were. When you think of, for example, in the case of courage, recklessness is not a virtue at all. You know, if you, what it is overconfidence. You have a feeling that you're not going to be killed or you're not going to be hurt. Say if you're in battle, so you're overconfident.
Live forever.
Live forever, yeah.
Young people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm not. Yeah. You go into battle and say, "Oh, I'm not going to be killed." So you just
the speeders.
Right. And the other, well, the counterpart to that is the person who is just reckless. Like just knows no fear, has no fear at all. And Aristotle says that it's natural to fear death. And that in fact the person who has no fear of death is kind of mad or not fully sane. So the extreme in his case is not a virtue at all.
Yes.
It's not excellence. It's gone over the edge, as it were. The deficiency, cowardice, it itself is a kind of excess. It's an excess of fear, so that you can't stand your ground in the face of death. So the idea of the meaning moderation that's not strictly true in Aristotle's philosophy.
Let's, for a moment, just get back to heroic excellence. This a term I've never heard before, by the way, and I quite like.
It's quite an odd term to apply to a philosopher, I guess.
Yes, and then when he described what God would be doing with his day, would be contemplating the universe. That's a fascinating thought, a fascinating consideration. Would he not also perhaps, and here we are speculating, of course, but in this heroic excellence, would he also not perhaps have to have some sort of courage in the creation of this universe?
No. Well, if you want Aristotle's answer, no, because all those virtues are to do with, as I said, ordinary human beings, ordinary citizens. God's above all that. So, you know, the only role for him really is contemplation. Again, in Aristotle.
Yes.
Speaking.
Go ahead.
Sorry, personally, I was going to say I don't really know myself what God would do, what else God might do. Because I assume if you come from that belief, you assume that he's finished his creation of the universe. So the only other thing to do would be for God. I say him, it might be her. The only other thing for God to do, according to Aristotle, is to contemplate, to think, reason.
Did Aristotle allow for, and then I'll ask if you allow for in your own thinking, that man can reach a pinnacle in his own life where he is enjoying an awareness of God or of creation or of divinity or of perfection? I think we can allow for atheists to accept perfection in creation. Can man aspire then to living perfectly? Let me ask you that. First of all, according to Aristotle.
According to Aristotle, yeah. In actual fact, philosophers can.
Oh,
there's
hope.
He had a very narrow view in a way. He said that only middle-aged Greek males and those a bit older than middle-aged Greek males could live that kind of life. In fact, they're the only ones that could be citizens. They're the only ones that can achieve eudaimonia, or ordinary excellence.
Tough balance, ageism.
Women and slaves can't.
Oh, yeah.
So when we say man, I prefer to use the word human because, one can still use Aristotle's philosophy, but I would want to include women. I want to include all humanity. Yeah.
Of course, yes. And when I use the word man, it's an abbreviation for all of humanity as well. I just find it convenient. So he believes then that only some certain members of a certain strata of society are capable of aspiring to living in a godlike way, and the slaves are not in a position to aspire, according to Aristotle, who just fell a notch in my thinking anyways with that perspective. And what is your perspective? Do you believe that man indeed can aspire to live in a godlike way?
I'm sure he can aspire to, yeah. Whether he would actually do it or be capable of... Well, it involves a consistency. Actually, to get back to Aristotle, that once you've developed the virtue, you develop it as a kind of a habit. It's not something you naturally have. It's something you're born with a capacity for, but it's not something you have unless you practice. It's like playing the piano. So, there's a kind of consistency that's developed through habit. So, once you've had the habit instilled, then you can continuously practice. You're in a position to continuously practice the virtue. I mean, you might have the occasional lapse. We all do, but
I have regular lapses. I have two questions, and I hope they don't escape me. If it is impossible for man to live perfectly, but not impossible for him to aspire to perfection, then don't you consider it might be futile for him to even aspire to perfection?
I think there's no harm in trying. I have a bit of a problem with that whole notion. I think anybody who went around thinking that they were perfect would be looked on as rather...
Would be what?
Anybody who went around thinking that they were perfect would perhaps be looked on by others as somewhat arrogant, maybe, or something else. I don't know. But the desire to... self-awareness, self-consciousness, the awareness of your faults is very important to develop beyond them or get over them. So I would say that it would be a continual struggle, and you probably won't reach it, but there's good reason to try.
All right, what is the good reason to try? What do you see as the good reason to try and continue with that struggle to live as excellently as possible?
Personal fulfillment, a sense of personal fulfillment. I think I'm speaking morally here. I'm not speaking of getting a good job, making a good salary, that kind of thing. Speaking strictly from a moral point of view, I think we feel good when we do good things.
Yes.
And the opposite when we do bad things. So, self-fulfillment. Perhaps even the esteem of others, if that's not regarded as too much of an ulterior motive. Everybody wants the good opinion of...
Yes, and I'm not sure, though, entirely how important it is that we have to have the esteem of others. If the others are snakes in the pit as to their own morality, who really wants to be king of the snake pit? If we're living in an age of nations, do we really want the esteem of all the idiots? I'm not sure. That's a question I have to face. And also, I think perhaps, where do we start describing that which is correct living? Moral values, indeed, I believe, are absolutely necessary to our enjoying a kind of balance with the rest of life. Do you see that? Do you look at that?
No, I suppose I have it on a very simple level. I mean, the first thing you must do is not harm people.
Why?
Hurt them.
Why? I mean, let's get a parameter on that. Why?
I think that's such a basic.
But according to what or who? Basic according to our humanity, according to God, according to our sense of...
Well, I would say it's a basic moral axiom that all good... You talked about idiots and people in the snake pit, but perhaps to them that moral axiom doesn't apply. But I think to most people, perhaps I have a more optimistic or a more optimistic view of humanity than you do.
No, I have an optimistic view of humanity, but I also must, I don't know, I feel compelled to continue examining all these questions. I do end up coming up with a percolating kind of optimism. I believe that moral conduct and good morality is absolutely essential to living with a kind of balance and in good health. So if we can possibly communicate into that crowd that don't happen to think that yet or don't accept that yet, we can have real effectiveness in civilizing the world. So these are things that certainly drive me to a purpose of living. They help describe for me a purpose of living. Let's talk about impeccability for a minute. Do you think living impeccably, living meticulously, and living with some sort of ease in all of that might contribute to excellence of living, excellence of humanity?
Living with ease. Yeah. You mean not being tense all the time, not having conflicts?
Without fear of judgment. Living impeccably but with ease is the combination of words that I wanted to really get across, because sometimes impeccability and meticulousness can imply stiff and tense and so on, whereas I don't necessarily think so. I think the framework of human living can allow for impeccability and a great and terrific ease as well, as though the power has to come through a kind of a conduit of some sort.
I think we shouldn't be self-righteous. I mean, I think we shouldn't be have too much of a sense of our own superiority. That perhaps leads to that stiffness of attitude that you mentioned. So I believe in a easygoing, non-judgmental. When I say non-judgmental, I mean I agree with you that some things deserve to be judged harshly and ought to be judged harshly. But the reason I brought up harm is there's a lot of things I disagree with. I think disagree with some of the things that you say.
Mm-hmm.
But I have, personally, I have a laid-back, if you like, attitude towards that, a relaxed attitude towards that. I can accept all forms of opinion unless I see that there's some kind of threat in them, or there's some kind of...
Or an interference, perhaps.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Interference is, you can't interfere with people unless they're interfering with you or interfering with others.
Or they give you their permission to interfere
Or
with
they
them.
give you permission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 2 points I hope to cover. Is there a harmony of forces that work through a man or a woman which can be somehow reconciled, a balance struck, which then permits that person a kind of continuity of pleasure, a richness of pleasure, an intelligent pleasure? Is there something that that man can do to effect his emancipation through the movement of these forces that work through us?
You mean a sort of higher quality of pleasure than perhaps what we're used
That's
to?
that would be the end result, but how do we go about reconciling all these forces that work through us? A lot of people have difficulty with a sexual force, a lot of people have difficulty with an intellectual force, or lack of perhaps. A lot of people have difficulty with any sense of physical balance whatsoever. And then other people seem to have a terrific sense of balance of all of these forces. And I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do to effect the emancipation, to strike the balance.
Well, there's nothing like sexual tension, is there, to take one's mind off the higher things. Well, one thing we can do, I suppose, is to consciously strive for something higher, for example, I mean, maybe this is a trivial example, but maybe to aspire to, say, read better things. Try and, if you've been used perhaps to reading things which have a sort of easy or simplistic message, try something more complicated.
More challenging.
Try something more challenging.
What about conversation? Do you believe conversation can increase a person's sense of the greater being?
With the right person, yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed, yeah. Let me check my notes. I have, now, how do words like discipline and morality then pertain to good living, or do they?
How does discipline and morality?
Discipline, let's stay with discipline for now. We've touched upon morality.
You mean? Yeah.
Self-discipline indeed, and discipline in the company of others and so on. Proper so-called conduct.
Yeah.
And so on.
A sense of propriety. You might, in social situations, you might want to say something to somebody and you realize it's inappropriate. Or maybe you actually do say that thing and you're told it's inappropriate and you realize, well, maybe I shouldn't say that thing in that situation. Self-discipline, well, that's been in Western philosophy, especially in early Greek philosophy, Aristotle and Plato, that was definitely considered a virtue. Self-control, Aristotle called it. In fact, for Plato, self-discipline was a sort of prelude toward becoming a philosopher king. For Plato's ideal state was ruled by philosopher kings.
So self-discipline was the prelude to becoming a philosopher king, according to Plato.
What happened is that the philosopher kings are trained in the academy, and they're presented with all these temptations, especially temptations of the flesh.
Oh, indeed.
And those that resist seem to have the right stuff, so they are chosen to be candidates, as it were, to go on to become what he called the guardians of the philosopher kings.
The guardians.
It's reason controlling passion, desire.
Are there any contemporary philosophers or thinkers today that you can think of or refer to who do refer or consider that living at the top is possible? No. I think the idea has become somewhat dated, out of favor, probably since Kant. Oh, really?
Kant introduced the idea, again, it's another form of self-control. Kant introduced the idea that we can transcend our surroundings and even our physical being by following maxims that were self-imposed. So you develop for yourself a concept of who you are, which is based on the various maxims or rules of life that you live by. And it's only in that way that you can transcend the social, psychological forces, if you like, that have molded you.
It sounds like a self-creative process.
It is indeed, yeah. In fact, Kant, speaking in the political realm, Kant thought that there was no need for a state if you could have these self-regulating beings.
Perfect anarchists.
And it's a perfect anarchist state, in the good classical sense.
Yes, indeed, yes, yes. Man in relationship to God, and man in very pleasant and perfect relationship to his other fellow men.
Yeah, God does come into it too.
Yes. Well, that's quite the utopian concept then of civilization, and that was Kant's idea, was Immanuel Kant.
Yeah,
yes. And what era of time was that?
He's 17th century. It's 18th century.
18th century, 1700s.
1700s.
Yes. Do you agree with him?
I don't. No. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. It's an interesting idea. Philosophy is full of interesting ideas that perhaps have little application, perhaps because, as you suggested, they idealize human beings rather too much. Kant, you see, Kant was not speaking of people as such, he was speaking of ideals. He was speaking of what morality ideally is. And that is, well, it's they're self-composed maxims. Then what you have to do is think to yourself, well, I've got this maxim, and I can live by it as a rule, but is it a moral rule? And Kant said, no, it's not a moral rule until you can say, should everybody do that?
Right.
So when you're acting morally, you're acting for all humanity, as it were.
Yes, as though indeed Carl Jung's archetypes and considerateness of moral structures being common to everybody was correct.
Yes.
Is there a relationship?
Well, yes and no. The idea is that you, as an individual, will that all other individuals, actually all other rational beings, can follow that rule. Kant thought, for example, that only rational beings can follow rules, can follow laws, which I believe is true. Animals can't do that.
Self-imposed laws, laws that man makes up in order to keep everybody civilized?
Yeah. Well, Kant was in a sense a determinist, and he believed that our emotional, psychological makeup was determined by external forces. But the one thing we do have is this ability, it's sort of practical reason, this ability to transcend that by following those rules. And that's what acting morally is. It's following the rules for their own sake, not for any ulterior motive.
Yes. Then, from what I'm hearing, then, I would assume that you don't agree that there are common reference points that have been given since so-called time immemorial for man about which to live in connection with other men and in connection with God, divine being, creator, perfect thing, whatever. You don't believe there are common reference points into which we're all born, the common design?
Personally, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe the world was designed. I must confess, can I do this on TV? I must confess I don't believe in God either.
Yes,
so
that's fine, yeah. But so you have aspirations. You speak in terms of greater beings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned that atheists can strive for perfection, and I believe that to be true. I don't have a clear-cut, definitive definition of what it is to be human. Aristotle and some of the other philosophers did, Kant, Aristotle, did, but they were coming within a religious framework. So I think perhaps what an atheist might say is that I can have a concept of perfection, but that concept of perfection is not some kind of preordained order that is independent of any possible preordained.
I hear you. Would you suggest then that your concept of perfection might be described or outlined by your relationships to other people?
Yes. Well, you learn from other people. You learn from the wiser.
Yes, but what if you have a history of failed relationships with other people? That's going to be pretty tough, to have faith in that, wonderful sense of perfection of humanity or perfection of your own humanity when relationships are suffering and there's the age of Nishan's, as it were, darkness seems to be so prevailing. That would be awfully difficult, I would think, for an individual who relies solely on relationships to help him describe himself.
Well, it's not solely on relationships, it's on reading and practice, and Self-examination.
Relationships then to other minds through books, self-examination, relationships then to your walking and your experiences with people, generally not necessarily your intimate relationships.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
All right. Yes, that helps to clarify it. All right. Sometimes it appears that everything around us throughout nature has been designed specifically for the edification of man, but you don't think so.
That we call that, philosophers call that an anthropocentric, it's rather a mouthful, anthropocentric view, literally human-centered.
Human-centered view.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can't allow, though, for this perfect thing, whatever it is, the light into which we're born, the mathematical design into which we were born, all these things that existed in such wonderful balance before we got here, can't we allow for that existence, whatever we want to call it, the giver, the thing, and our existence, our wonderful self-centered, arrogant existence? We allow for both?
That's an interesting. I remember when I was teaching a class once. We were talking about evolution versus creationism, and I said, if you believe in the theory of evolution, you can't believe in God because it's such a random.
Yes, it's a denial of the perfection. Yes.
And I thought about that one, and I thought, well, you know, if God exists, she might work in mysterious ways, so why not? Perhaps the whole notion of God is totally unfathomable anyway, that there may be a purpose behind evolution that we just can't see.
Indeed, and if God, however, were an interventionist, we wouldn't have the wonderful mystery that allows us to have a faith in God. Right. For the time being, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a good slice. Something certainly to contemplate, and I thank very much Professor John Rowell from Selkirk College, who will be returning to us momentarily to join Harry Jukes in conversation at the end of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to our den. Here we are at Meeting at the Top, our debut program, and also from Castlegar, Selkirk College, we have a professor of chemistry, Mr. Harry Jukes. Welcome to the program, Harry.
Thank you, Harry.
Well, you've heard from John Rowell, professor of English and philosophy, as to what living at the top is all about, from his point of view, certainly. And I sense that we're going to be continuing to examine this whole notion of living at the top, probably almost per program. And if we're lucky, we'll have people who actually are living at the top and see what they have to say. Do you believe that it's possible for a man, woman, even young person, really, to experience living at the top of their form, with any kind of continuity?
With any kind of continuity, I think, is a key word here. I certainly think we all are subject to peak experiences when we get a taste of that. And perhaps there are, certainly we're led to believe anyways, that there are gurus around the world who can achieve that on a more or less steady state basis. But I think for the rest of us mere mortals, it's something that we just have to work at as we can, and try to keep progressing towards that peak experience and trying to maintain it.
So you're suggesting, by the sounds of it, that there might be a variety of peak experiences in any one man's life, and perhaps if he's fortunate, he'll have enough peak experiences that can then lend themselves to a steady exquisiteness.
I would think so, yes. And I think this is something that's very, very difficult to even visualize. I remember one time years ago, I had an exceptionally good day, and the next day I thought, well, I certainly can't expect anything that good another day. And then I thought, well, why put that thought out? Why not just try to work with that and say, well, okay, I'm going to expect an even better day. And that next day was even better. And the next day was better, and the next day was better. And after about a week of this, I had to stop it because it just felt like I was blowing my mind. And, I didn't feel that it was something that I could.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, well, I don't know about jealousy, but you know, it was something that I felt that I couldn't maintain. I didn't want to. I was afraid of it.
Now that's what I was wondering about. It was becoming so tangibly exciting or excellent, high, that you became afraid of this continuity.
Yeah, essentially.
So this opens up a whole new can of something or other. I didn't want to quite say worms. Are we attitudinizing then? Are we possibly having attitudes and frames of mind that are preventing this continuity, that are bringing about that fear?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I think, from my perspective anyways, this is something that we are constantly subjected to by the media and other people, and we are constantly facing with the passions that John was talking about. You know, this is something that we're constantly dealing with. Is this sort of thing.
So it sounds to me then what you're suggesting in that statement is that society is not very well geared for people to live at the top with any kind of continuity or consistency.
Well, I consider life in this world as simply a glorified schoolroom where we set ourselves these situations that we have to learn from, and that's the whole purpose of it, is to learn from these situations that we set out for ourselves.
Yes, almost self-imposed education, as it were. I still want to get back to a point, though. It appeared to me then, when you said that you became afraid after a week of consistent excellence and a really top-dollar feeling, and you became afraid, it couldn't help but strike me that perhaps society isn't encouraging people to live at the top. Perhaps society has a kind of a built-in system that suggests living at the top should be something that we ought to be frightened about, and it would be preferable that you live somewhat sluggishly and in fear.
Don't you think that's what
yes, I do.
telling?
I was hoping you'd agree.
Yeah, sure. I certainly feel that. Yeah.
You do feel that. All right. So I think also then in that case we have to look at the educational process, don't we? There's got to be a fundamental boo going on there if we're not changing society to allow people to have some continuity about living at the top.
Well, I would think the educational system has a lot to learn too. Yeah. I think I have myself 10 grandchildren, and not a one of them has been in the public school system. They've all been homeschooled and are being homeschooled, and as far as I'm concerned, they're much better adjusted than most of the students I see now.
You're employed by a school board, are we not?
School board. I better watch what I'm saying here.
Indeed.
But my hair's white now.
Let's change the topic. I'll change the question for now. Stephen Hawking, who is a marvelous author and a provocative thinker, suggested that man and his laws of physics is so wonderful that God works his way through the laws of physics. And I found that to be a remarkably presumptuous statement in that it assumes that man invented the laws of physics and then somewhere along the line God agreed and descends disseminates his power, creation, whatever, through these laws of physics that man created. Somehow that seems backwards to me. Isn't there an intelligence there that existed prior to all these chemists and physics people that said, here's some intelligence through which comes the creation? Didn't Stephen Hawking have it backwards, though?
Well, you won't find any argument from me. I feel exactly the same as you. I feel that we try to explain this creative intelligence, God, whatever term you want to apply to it, that we try to explain it in terms of our own actions, our own understandings, and so on. And we find time and time and time again that we only get a little of the picture, and we go off half-cocked on that little bit of the picture, and then we disrupt the whole environment as we see now, or the whole Chernobyl thing with the nuclear reactors. I mean, we're just prone to this sort of thing with our limited sort of thinking that we have.
Almost as though that we're inherently destructive because we're so distant from the real intelligence about which, we were born into. Let me look at that just for a second in conversation with you. If we can identify mathematics as being an intelligent design of sorts, a certain formula like Pythagorean formula and so on, and we can identify laws of chemistry that allow for associations and relationships and favorable traits and so on, negatives and positives, and all these things that seem to indicate a wonderful brightness that occurred before we did, but there it was, and it'll even allowed for our creation. Can we not then use our minds to ascend through this kind of understanding, through the fundamentals of chemistry or the fundamentals of physics or the fundamentals of mathematics? Can't we see those as ladders, perhaps, to a greater understanding of this wonderful brightness?
Sure. But I don't think it's limited to physics or chemistry or mathematics. I think the pipe fitter out on the job or the person out farming has just as much, and in fact, in many cases, maybe more of an opportunity and more of an insight into that greater picture.
Because he's closer to nature, or there's an integrity of activity that you're referring to here?
Well, I don't think any of us have a corner on the way to this understanding. What are there, 6 billion people in the world, and I think there's probably 6 billion ways to achieve that awareness and that understanding.
Let me ask you this, that might simplify things for myself as well as for the viewers. No matter what route we take, is the fundamental premise of this program that all great disciplines meet at the top. Is that a correct assumption?
I think all people, if you're talking about people that have achieved an awareness, then they are certainly at a level there that they will meet. I think we find this. I almost feel there's an underground of ideas and so on. If you're tuned into that underground, then you are in tune with all the people all over the world that are working on that particular area of expertise, of searching, of whatever. And I think, from my own point of view, getting back to some of your earlier comments as far as chemistry is concerned, certainly there is some basic philosophies of chemistry that we can apply in any of these fields of understanding that we're looking at. We say that, for instance, the green of the color in the flask here. Okay, that's green because of certain interactions with the electromagnetic fields and so on. Okay, if there are atoms or molecules that are vibrating at a certain frequency, they will interact with that magnetic field. If they don't vibrate at that frequency, then it's just as if they're invisible to that magnetic field.
Yes.
And so we get the analogy then that, how tuned in are you? At what level are you tuned in? We keep hearing these phrases. Somebody is tuned in. Well, that's quite feasible from chemistry. They can tune in their ideas and their thinking to that level, and they're oblivious or even invisible to anything else that's going on.
Yes. Let's talk for a moment then, stemming from this, about the narcotics of the mind. I've heard, and perhaps you can verify it, that joy can be explained by a certain kind of narcotic being released into the brain and so on. Perseverance and great feats of super strength and so on can be explained when a person is under terrible stress and it's his mother under the car and he raises that car up because narcotics have gone into the mind and so on to stimulate this person to respond like that. Is there a chemical thing that can be identified here that would be stimulated by, for example, love or intelligence or music? I mean, are we looking really at the possibility of a continuity of bliss through a narcotic emission of our mind? And is that somehow connected to a moral conduct? Had to get
Oh,
that in
neat questions, neat questions.
Okay.
I love this. But I can certainly hear what you're saying, and there's certainly that feeling around. I've thought about this on many occasions, and I sometimes wonder if maybe we haven't got the cart before the horse. You know, maybe the music gives us an emotional stimulus that then results in the release of these endorphins or so on.
Which then would have to explain there that the emotions are connected to the endorphins.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we can follow this, and I want to follow this, and I think the key here has to be the word continuity again. And you were frightened of continuity after a week of consistent pleasure. Now that's a very interesting to me that you would first of all admit it and then have a week too. I mean, that's incredible. I've had a few days. I've had a brief occasion when I was 17 of a very blissful experience, like an egg of bliss cracked over my head. And as soon as I tried to control it, consciously, of course, it disappeared. But there was some narcotic going on there that made me feel really particularly strong. And I felt quite infinite at that moment as well. But you had a week. Now that's terrific stuff. Is there then a mechanism, are we facilitated in our brain to allow for continuity of pleasure, continuity of joy? And should our society not reorient itself around those reference points?
Yes, yes, yes.
Good. Elaborate, please.
Yeah. I think you're right on there. I think we should be thinking in terms of trying to establish a continuity of that sort of feeling, and I think that's quite feasible, and I think it's coming. I think it's something that's coming. I think, and I think we'll see it. I think you and I will be seeing a lot of this if we look closely.
I hope so, but what do you mean when you say it's coming?
I think there's a change throughout. I mean, the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And God, aren't we, eh?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the things that are going on, and we find just fantastic dichotomies that, unfortunately we usually see only the negative aspect through the media and the television, but I subscribe to a couple of journals that show a lot of the positive stuff that's going on, and it's absolutely incredible what some of these people are doing and getting others to do with them. The people that are going out to help other people and so on. Because all of this, as far as I'm concerned, whatever your philosophy is, whatever your belief system is, it all hinges on actually applying those principles that you profess, applying them in the exterior world here.
And I think there must probably have to be a time of trial and error in the application process.
Sure.
Carlos Castaneda used an interesting word, anthropologist connected to a Yaqui sorcerer in Mexico, did a lot of drugs, but he used an interesting word. He talked about impeccable living, mood of a warrior, living as though in a mood of a warrior, but the most interesting word he used was the word mass. There needs to be a mass, as it were, a mass of understanding or a mass of intellects at the doorstep of heaven or at that gate where we'll blow through to emancipation. A mass of understanding that we can shoot through finally and at last and perhaps reclaim something heavenly. And I thought the word was very interesting to ponder and contemplate, and I wanted to squeeze it in here.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of people that feel that same way. I mean, look at what's his name, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I mean, he's saying the same thing. Get 10,000 people in an area that are meditating, and you'll have a change of consciousness throughout that whole area.
Yes, and critical mass is
and that's the same thing,
relevant,
and it's relative to chemistry too.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
Physics,
yes. So you're fortunate enough to have to understand the fundamental principles of chemistry, and apply them perhaps to what might be described as cerebral or spiritual concepts of growth.
Well, understand is a tough word here. I had a friend of mine over last night, and she was saying, you can tell a young child not to touch the iron because it's hot. She said, he's learned that. When he goes over and touches the iron anyways, suddenly he understands, okay?
Yeah.
Now, so understanding a lot of these principles, we still don't understand. We get to work with them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who's an engineer down at Cominco, chemical engineer, and one of the big problems is all the stuff he learned in school doesn't seem to apply all the time. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's always something that's throwing it off, and so we don't understand these things truly as much as we would like to say we do.
Do you believe, and I asked John Rowell this question, do you believe that conversations such as this, for example, and other people's interests, perhaps stimulated by these kinds of conversations, are valuable to this completion of understanding?
Oh, definitely, yes. We have to be aware of what other people are doing and how other people are facing these same situations and so on. It's just, yeah, very definitely. One of my students last year was a native Indian, and he was a mature student. He was very uncertain about coming back and facing all these teenagers, you know, and intellectually. So what he did, he went out and he did some fire walking, right, over, you know, a pit and so on. He said it's amazing what that did for his self-confidence. And you can talk to all sorts of people and they say, well, it's because of this, it's because of the endorphins, it's because of the sweat buildup on your feet and so on.
Right.
They never go out and do it, you know, on the basis of their theories. You know? So, yeah. But, okay, so it's important to know these things, to hear these other people that have faced similar situations and have managed to work through them somehow or other. And yeah, I think this is very important.
Good, good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, once again, we've had a mouthful, and here we are examining the concept of living at the top. And I'm very thankful to Harry Jukes, chemistry professor of Selkirk College, for appearing on our debut program alongside John Rowell. And he'll be back momentarily with John Rowell to close the program. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the professors from Selkirk College are here with us tonight on our debut program. This is Professor John Rowell of English and a teacher also of philosophy, and this is Professor Harry Jukes, a chemistry professor at Selkirk College. And we've been examining this evening the idea of living at the top, and also examining the possibility that our brain releases certain narcotics, perhaps, if that's the right word, which allow or explain joy. But one thing that certainly I've encountered tonight is some difficulty in the language we might choose to use, or the language we might have to find to use in order to explain the words that we're now groping with, words like emancipation, joy, continuity of bliss. These are difficult terms, and they haven't really been explored terribly much with any sort of a new lexicon, perhaps. And I would like to address this question of language and words and combinations of words which might help us to describe ascension to spirit to Professor John Rowell.
When Harry was speaking, I brought to mind a group of contemporary philosophers. They're called eliminative materialists. And what they want to eliminate is any talk of spirituality, mind, any mentalistic concept, because they believe that our minds, or we call our minds, is nothing but chemical reactions in the brain. And they even want to go so far, some anyway, they want to go so far as to take that kind of talk out of ordinary language, not just out of scientific or philosophical language.
That's a big editing job.
I know, it's a big editing job. It raises, for example, if you use the word pain, they would want to change it to something like, what would it be? C fibers firing. I'm not well up on it myself, but so little Johnny would come in and not say, Mummy, I'm in pain, but Mummy, C fiber X5271, or whatever.
Reducing everything to some sort of fundamental physical interaction of some sort.
Well, I remember attending a philosophy conference, and somebody was putting forward this view, and some of us in the audience we're making that point, but aren't we getting rid of some moral language and spiritual language that has at least spiritual language that has a function, moral function, in our ordinary discourse? And he said, why say something inaccurate when you can say something accurate? And that was his answer. So
Here we
it
have.
concerns me, anyway. It
What
concerns
are the
me.
name of these philosophers? What do
They're
they call
called
themselves?
eliminative materialists.
Now I understand what that term means. And I also understand that the word philosophy is derived from philo and sophia, which is love and wisdom. However do they explain love?
Well, exactly. That's
So they're not philosophers. They're thinkers. And thinking through this physical, chemical thing going on.
well, it's been a notorious difficulty for philosophers to explain the relationship between mind and body. And
I would imagine.
yeah, that's dualism, right? What we
Uh-huh.
call dualism.
Yeah.
There's a separation of mind and body. And the materialists say that there is no separation, that it's all
There isn't a
it's all
separation.
body chemistry. Yeah.
But-
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what I'm hearing here is that the language is actually limiting our understanding of the process, eh? And I think probably it is, but I think we're maybe going the wrong direction here. I'm thinking for instance, in terms of a native Indian I was working with up in the Chilcotin, who came up one day and said, "I'm sorry, I've got to go. My grandfather just died." About 100 miles away, no verbal communication at all, simply whatever, telepathy or whatever. Now, maybe this is what we're looking towards. Maybe we have to look towards something like that.
I have a question for you. How can we live at the top if our minds are somehow persuaded to stay under the rock? Is it fear of the light? Fear of judgment? You really converse with worms, do you? I don't think so. Although some people are quite convincing for their efforts. Fear of judgment, cut off, isolated, ridiculed, humiliated, deballot. Yes, I suppose judgment must have something to do with preferring the view from beneath the rock. But with your light, which stems from here, you may ask the judges, each of them one at a time, who are you? You may be surprised how quickly they make way for you as you ascend to the top. Some may even follow you, the pioneer, the trailblazer. We needn't be concerned about who says what. The whole of human history, eons of the culture of death and judgment, amount to nothing more than a couple of vats of rot, probably decayed worms. We even have machines now which protect the value of toilet paper. But the value of humanity? Ask the Serbian rapist. Real progress. Let us begin to speak from the top, being afforded that new perspective where words like compassion, charitableness, and considerateness also outline something intrinsically human. Let those words which enshrine the goodness of our humanity act like torches, each of them, as we proceed even in niches and darkness toward the top. Oh, the stuff of heroic legend. I'll be back in a fortnight, waiting along the incline. Good night.